Well, welcome to A Voice and Beyond. We have quite a treat. Today, we have a 2-for-1 deal. We have YogaVoice in the studios today. We would like to welcome Mark Moliterno, which is a nice Italian name, and Kristin Roney, who together are YogaVoice. And I am so thrilled to have you here. How are you both?
Doing very well. Thank you for having us.
It's a
Yeah, thank you for
pleasure.
having us.
So, where are you located? Where are you, Kristin?
I am in northern New Jersey.
Okay, and Mark?
And I'm in the northern part of Philadelphia, of Pennsylvania, in the Lehigh Valley.
Okay, I don't know where that is. I know Philadelphia, and that's where we met. We actually met at the Voice Foundation Symposium, where you came up and introduced yourself. And I'm so grateful because since then I've looked into the work that you both do, and it is brilliant work. And I think we're at a stage in time where we need to be open to different modalities. People are needing different approaches. They're needing, it's not a one size fits all. It's not a one tool fits all approach to the singing voice anymore. People, especially since the pandemic, are needing different types of help and different types of therapies. And I love the work that you're doing. So I'd like to start by introducing you both. So Kristin, you're a mezzo-soprano, and you've had a huge career, a very successful performance career. And you're also a voice teacher, and you've maintained an active voice studio since 2009. And Mark, you're an accomplished professional opera singer, voice teacher, yoga teacher. You're a certified yoga therapist, a workshop leader, and author. So both of you, where did you meet? What's your backgrounds here?
We met on the third floor of Erdman Hall at Westminster Choir College on a
Okay.
Tuesday morning at 8 o'clock.
Okay, so what were you doing there?
Go ahead, Kristen.
Well, I was spending the majority of my time freelancing, and I was struggling with the fact that I was getting all these gigs that Kristen in grad school would have felt like were like made it moments for me in my career. And I was really unhappy. And I felt like, well, wait a minute. Like these are those gigs that you were like that would be that you made it, like that would mean success for you. And I was just not happy, and I couldn't quite figure out why. And I've always been interested in holistic approaches to anything. And I was speaking with a very dear friend, and she said, "Oh, have you heard of this teacher, Mark Moliterno?" And I said, "No, who's that?" And she said, "Oh, I think you should reach out to him about lessons." And I've always been interested in the chakra system, and she knew that. And so she said, "I think he works with like chakras and stuff like that." And I was like,
All
"Okay,
the
well,
woo-woo.
yes, the woo-woo, all that stuff." And I grew up in Northern California and went to Waldorf school, so like I prescribe to all of that. That's great. So I think you need a healthy balance of being open to different types of modalities. So I had a lesson with Mark, and I was hooked. Like one lesson, I was like, "Yep, this is it. Great. I want to work this way." And so I did. And he was my teacher for a very long time and my mentor. And then that relationship shifted to business partners, and here we are.
Yeah, so your background though, you
Mm,
you you're a trained classical singer, and
yes.
yes, and you've had this amazing performance career. Like, what are some of the gigs that you were doing? Because when I read your bio, I'm going, wow, this is incredible. And so, you know, you had that success. And I'd like to know, so what kind of work were you doing? You came to a place where none of that was satisfying you. And what did Mark help you? What turned around at that point?
Well, so in terms of gigs, I was doing choral gigs at Alice Tully Hall. And those felt like made it moments for me. You know, like some of the more elite choirs in New York. And then I was getting roles for things, roles that I really wanted. And that was exciting. I had an opportunity to sing at the Vatican. That was exciting as well.
Oh, what?
And oh yes. And it's, you know, it's like so huge. It was the first time I'd ever been. I was like, could not believe how massive it was.
It's
But
massive.
it's massive.
It's a whole
It's so
city.
big.
It has its own postcode.
Yeah, right.
Oh yeah, I know. I was like, I was, yeah, I even thinking about it now, I think I have a hard time like conceptualizing in my mind how big the Vatican is. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
anyway, I was in these rehearsals for one particular gig, and I was shocked by how unhappy all the people were, and how and it made me take a step back, because I was like, oh, I don't want that. Hold on. Like I don't
Right.
want to feel this way. That doesn't make sense. Like, this is supposed to be a joyful act, and
Mm.
it doesn't feel that way. Um, and things weren't quite clicking. So I took a step back because of various reasons, and I decided I was just going to sing to sing. And I was going to maintain my studio and say yes to the things that I knew I would enjoy doing creatively,
Mhm.
and not have it be about money. And so I did that for a
That's
while.
tough. Yeah, that's tough when essentially we all need an income, and to make that choice and to go, I'm only going to do the things that bring me joy. And then when you found Mark, what
Mm.
changed? What was the shift for you?
Well, Mark taught and still teaches, like, this is a bedrock foundational concept for YogaVoice, that you are already whole, that there's nothing wrong with you or broken. And so the fact that I was having these, like, you know, somatic messages that like, no, this is not working, that was something to listen to. And when I was, and I felt so much joy just in my one lesson with Mark, that I was like, well, I'm just gonna, I read it somewhere. It's like, I think some like coaches call it the lighthouse method. Like, when you don't know what you want to do,
Mm.
you just do things that make you feel happy or joyful.
Yes. Yes.
And it doesn't matter what it is or if they're related or not, you just keep doing those things. And it's like rowing your boat towards a lighthouse. The more you do it, the more it will become clear what it is you really, really want to do. And so that was what those were. So I did that.
Mm.
So I just kept going back, and then I got trained in YogaVoice and became a teacher and went through training with Mark. And I'm a much happier person, I think, as a result.
Mm.
Yeah.
Listening to your story, I feel there's a lot of singers that would be in your situation, of that losing the joy of singing, because essentially a lot of the training that not all singers have, but especially the majority of classical voice singers, they go into a lesson and they're picked apart with everything that's wrong with their voices rather than what's working well for them. It's like going to a ballet lesson, that classical training. It's to tear apart everything that's wrong and not focus on the things that are doing well. And I mean, that joy would be beaten out of you. So I'm not surprised you got to that point. So Mark, let's hear your story, and we'll circle back to some of this.
My story with how this all happened and how I came to, okay. I was singing professionally back in the 80s, 1980s, the last century.
Join the club.
Yeah. and I had a gig at a beautiful summer festival in Banff, Canada. And I had an experience with a yoga class, and I thought, this is amazing. I want to do this for the rest of my life. And then when I got back to Los Angeles, where I was living at the time, I looked up a teacher and I found a teacher, and I started taking yoga classes, and I was blown away. I just knew in my body, and my mind, and that it was something that I really wanted to do for the rest of my life. And I knew it because it touched something in me. It awakened something in me that I felt very specifically had been lying dormant. And I couldn't really put my finger on it at the time, but I knew it made sense. I just knew it made sense. So, I started practicing yoga. And then as I was singing, I would have opportunities to teach yoga to people who wanted me to teach them, but I wasn't a yoga teacher. So people were sort of gravitating toward me to teach them how to do yoga. But I said, I don't teach, but you can come practice with me. So over time, enough people wanted to learn what I was doing that I decided I should get some yoga training and so become a yoga teacher. And I did that. And then these two pieces started to fit together, this life in singing and music and this life in yoga. And I started to recognize that I was able to experience in my own body when yoga was supportive. And when I would do a yoga practice, say in the afternoon, and have a performance in the evening, I recognized that my body felt a certain way and my voice felt a certain way, and I had a certain clarity of thought. And when I didn't, I recognized something was different. And then I started to be able to hear in other people's singing. I started to be able to notice when I would hear a colleague or a singer that I knew was very career driven, and there would be a certain sound in their voice. And I could then also be able to hear in a different singer who was very sort of motivated by self-expression and honesty and truthfulness in the music making. I could hear a different quality in their voice. And so I began to surmise that if enough people could find their way to yoga in the singing industry, it could literally change the way the industry makes music.
Yes.
And so it was a very big picture. But I really recognized that yoga has the ability to do that. Yoga has the whole project of yoga is to become more self-aware and to become truer to who you are. So if singers can learn the principles of yoga and literally practice them, then in fact it will affect the way their voices are used. That was the basic premise. So then we started working on some of these details with the chakra system, and understanding that the energetic sources that are in your body already, and this is why Kristin says, one of our principles is that it's already within you. There's nothing broken. It's already there. That we began to recognize how those actually interfaced with elements of systematic voice technique that I learned from my teacher, Richard Miller, at the Oberlin Conservatory. And so I had this very strong background in vocal pedagogy, which was, science-based. And then I had this information from yoga, and I started to see how the two things meshed and how they met. And I just began practicing it and teaching it, and developed a way of expressing it and sharing it with other people that eventually became the bedrock for what Kristin and I have developed together. So that's the sort of short story.
Okay. Now, I love the fact that you mentioned Richard Miller, because we talked about this a couple of weeks ago. And I mean, Richard Miller is a very highly acclaimed pedagogue, and there are so many people that follow his teachings. And then there are a lot of people that have moved away from some of the ideas that he had and don't actually necessarily believe that this is what happens. But nearly all of us have read The Structure of Singing. We're very well acquainted with Richard Miller. So how did his teachings impact your pedagogy, and has his teaching influenced the way that you structured the program that you've created?
Yeah, so I studied with Richard Miller from 1978 to 83. And those were the years that he was simply teaching, and The Structure of Singing was published in 1986. So he was writing it while I was studying with him.
Right.
And he was also beginning to work with the vocal laboratory instruments. And so I was one of the first people at Oberlin who actually sang an aria with a laryngoscope down his nose.
Oh my gosh.
And I was able to watch it on the television monitor. I sang Non più andrai, and everyone was like, and we were all just mesmerized by the dance of the vocal cords.
Yes.
It was quite amazing. Yeah. But in those days, Miller taught from the perspective of someone who had studied bel canto methodology in Italy with Ricci and bel canto masters. And so his teaching was all about the most efficient way and the most healthy way to use the voice, which he believed came from the bel canto tradition. The bel canto tradition is a beautiful form of combined energies and combined differences. So in other words, hallmarks of bel canto are chiaro-scuro, light and dark.
Yes.
Appoggio, the balance of inhalation and exhalation forces. Registration that includes a balance of chest and head voice. The idea of legato singing always having a bit of agility or spin in it, and agility and coloratura always having an underlying or undergirding of legato. So it's always about combining these opposing forces, or things that seem like opposing forces, in one vocal gesture or one idea, which is an aria.
Love how you describe that. I just had to say that. Keep going.
So I've always believed that Miller was teaching yoga in his way, because that's what yoga is. Yoga means to combine things, to yoke things together. And the things you yoke together are things that seem like they've separated or that are opposite. Or so like we might say that we're combining body and mind, or the steadiness and ease, or strength and flexibility, all those different things. So yoga is this combining. And so I started to make that observation. And so I had this background, and the background I had was scientific, but it was also pedagogical. And it just made sense to me when I started putting it together with yoga, how those two things met. And so, yes, the work that Richard Miller did is the sort of backbone of what we do vocally in YogaVoice, because it is, as he would say, the way to functional efficiency in the voice. And so what we want to do is make sure that we are doing what is anatomically correct or healthy or well-balanced in a way that is most efficient. Now, we recognize that that is not the only way to sing, but we do recognize that it is based in anatomical fact. And so that's what makes it not woo-woo. And it is based in what is functionally efficient. And we know it is functionally efficient because in the bel canto, in the repertoire, to sing that repertoire well, you had to be functionally efficient. And so the pedagogy grew out of the necessity to sing the music that the composers were writing that had all these demands of these combined sort of forces.
Do you think that Richard Miller would approve of the work that you're doing? Would he endorse YogaVoice?
I like to think that he would be very interested in it, and I do think he would be supportive. He and I
Yes.
always had a good relationship, so I think he would be very supportive. And if
Yes.
he saw things in it that he didn't agree with, I'm sure he would tell me. But I don't think that I don't think that we would be at that point. I think he would be supportive, and especially as I give credit where credit is due to his work. I think it would be interesting to him to see how another generation has built on it.
Mm. It sounds like you've taken this to another level. You've got the work of Richard Miller, and Kristin, feel free to chime in here, but this has become a lot more holistic. You've taken all aspects of the singer. You've got the spiritual, the emotional, the physical, all working together. So it's a far more holistic approach than what, say, the structure of singing was, or the work of Richard Miller. And what do you say to people? Okay, when we talk about yoga, we're talking about a spirituality as well. Because yoga, there's a lot of preconceptions about yoga and a lot of misconceptions about yoga, where people think it is a spiritual, a woo-woo, a religious practice. So how do you respond to those sorts of claims?
Yeah, so I had someone, I was in a part of the state and the country where we might call it part of the Bible Belt, and we might
Yes.
say that there's a certain sometimes people of certain faiths have difficulty with the idea of yoga because they think it is a spiritual practice that's counter to
Yes.
what they believe. And we honor all people in what they believe. And the question was, what do you say to someone who says this is not in my faith tradition? And how can I make this? How can I accept this if it's not part of what I think is important in my faith life? If it is a spiritual practice, and what I answered is that yoga makes you more authentic in who you are.
Mm-hmm.
That is really what yoga is. You can certainly look at yoga in an historical context as a religious idea from Hinduism. You can also look at it in terms as a technology, which is how we view it. Yoga is a technology that if you do certain practices, which is like the software, and you install it in the hardware, which is your body mind, then in fact certain things will happen, and you will become more so. So the idea in yoga. The Yoga Sutra, which is one of the primary source documents of yoga, says that yoga is the calming of your fluctuations of your consciousness so that you can begin to see who you are. And
Love
so
it.
yoga is not to, it's this whole concept of we're not taking anything and putting it on, right? That makes us a Hindu or a Christian or a Jew or whatever. It's not that we're taking something and putting it on. In
Mm.
fact, what yoga does is it peels away the things that hide the true nature of your own self. If you are a Christian, you will become a more authentic person by doing yoga. So your Christian faith will develop and
Mm.
deepen.
Mm-hmm.
If you are any religious faith, we could say the same thing because yoga is in the way we teach it as a technology, it is non-deistic. It's non-dogmatic. It's not based in a religious belief. It's based on a technology of finding authenticity and self-awareness.
Yes. I just want to say right here that I don't practice yoga. So for the people that are listening who are thinking, oh, I've got these two on because I'm a big yogi and I want everyone to go out there and start doing yoga, I don't practice yoga. However, I am open to finding and discovering new gateways and modalities to help my students. If I feel there is merit in something, I have an open mind. And what I'm hearing from you guys is making a whole lot of sense. And I think that as a teaching community, we all need to receive information with an open mind and an open heart. We need to get out of our own ways and our own limiting beliefs and listen to what else is out there. Just, broaden your horizons, people. I'm not saying this is the be all and end all, but this perhaps may be another gateway. So I hope that people are receiving this information in a way that, there could be something in this, and I want to listen to this a little bit more and find out more about it. So that's where I'm coming at this from. It's not about me being a yogi and a Hindu or a Buddhist or whatever you want to call it. It is about another thing that maybe if I learn a little bit more about this, it can help my students. It can help me get out of my own way as well.
Right. And I think this is where, our technology is useful because we don't talk about those things in the voice lesson. So if it touches you spiritually, it's because it touches something that you believe, and you might believe that in the music. It's not so much that we're trying to create any spiritual, enlightenment. What we're trying to do is really do it, just what you said, is help people access what is already there in themselves, in their voices. Kristin, did you want to jump in?
Yes, actually, I had two things. First, regarding YogaVoice. So yoga is a term that people use very freely, but there are many different schools of yoga and types of yoga. There are yoga does not mean just postures, or just a spiritual practice. And depending on the type of yoga that speaks to you, you can have a variation of different types of practices and philosophies. And in YogaVoice, we use multiple different disciplines. So it's not just one way of looking at yoga, which I think is important to remember.
Yes.
And then, yes. And then the other thing I wanted to say was when Mark was speaking to how Richard Miller's teachings are part of what YogaVoice grew out of, and this functionally efficient singing. Along with that, we're very interested in YogaVoice in choices. And when Mark said, this isn't the only way to do something, right? That's not the only way to sing. Clearly, there are so many different genres and styles. And I believe you yourself are from a contemporary background, correct?
100%. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So, for example, sometimes people think that YogaVoice is just, in terms of singing, is just for Western classical style singers, and it absolutely is not. Because, for example, if you think about an onset, there are different types of onsets. And when you practice YogaVoice, what you're doing is you're awakening your awareness to how to coordinate all of those types of onsets so that you have choices. So perhaps you have someone who is singing a pop song and wants a more aspirated onset, then that can be a choice. We're interested in choices, not one way to do everything. Yeah. So, and that is out of Richard Miller's teachings, and that there are these different types of onsets.
Yes.
Not that one is better than another, but that it can be a choice.
Yes. And in CCM, we use different types of onsets as a choice to portray a specific emotion.
Right.
Essentially, it's a stylistic and an emotional choice. Okay, so we've talked about people and spiritual and religious practices. So people who are worried about that, okay, so I'm trying to make this inclusive here.
Okay.
We've made it inclusive to style. Thank you, Kristin. We've talked about CCM and classical. So everybody, doesn't matter what type of music you're singing. Now, let's address the people who think that you can't do this particular work because they are not fit and they're not flexible. And there's no way I could do a yoga pose. Let's address those people. So now that we've cleared all those misconceptions, everyone will go, okay, I can listen now, it's safe.
Okay.
Well, we've worked with people who have lots of different needs, and one of the things I really love personally about YogaVoice is that you can modify everything and anything, and that's necessary because everybody's body is different and one size does not fit all. So yoga, depending on the type of yoga you practice, right? We were talking about different schools of thought, has different demands and but the whole point of YogaVoice is to meet the need of the individual. So if it does not meet a person's need, then it is not useful. So we're all about finding ease and steadiness and comfort in the practice for that individual. So if that means that they need to be seated in a chair instead of standing, then that's what we're going to do. If someone has issues with blood pressure, then we're going to shift postures a certain way so that they're more accommodating. Mark, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, so I think what makes YogaVoice unique, and now we're talking about I'm going to tack to a little bit of a different point of view on this, is that it's not just about your body. It's not just about what you're capable of physically. I made reference earlier to the idea that within your body, mind, are these 7 energetic centers called the chakras. And the chakras are there for everybody, whether you are, disabled or less able or differently abled. Everyone has the chakras, and everyone has the sources for voice in them. And so what we do is we look at the singer from the point of view of energy. We view that the voice as an energetic instrument that manifests through a physical mechanism, but we listen and we teach to the energy in the person and the holistic nature of what that person has within them. So, and we do that by listening critically as though we're listening pedagogically, right? So
Right.
we listen to the sound, we understand what is our components of functionally efficient singing. And I use that term again to describe anatomical truth, shall we say.
Yes.
But then we look at how the voice is either manifesting, and then we can identify where the energy is balanced or imbalanced. And that's how we do it. So if a person is sitting in a chair, they can use their 7 chakras. If a person is lying down, they can use their 7 chakras. If they're standing up, they can use their 7. If they're standing on their heads, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
They can do anything. Because,
Okay.
and that's why we say it's for everybody.
Okay, let's break this down even further. So now we're getting into what you actually do and what a client is likely to experience within a lesson, which is, I think, what we all want to hear now. And first up, is this a method? Well, it sounds like it's a methodology, but it's not your typical methodology because it's student or client centered, so that you're dealing with the person in front of you, whereas a methodology typically is something where week 1, this is what you do, week 2, so it's not prescribed, it's open to the person. You are dealing with that person in front of you in that moment in time. Okay.
That's what we train our teachers to do, yes.
Right. Okay, so I've come to you for the first time, and like most of us, we do an assessment. Us teachers, we do some kind of diagnostic thing with our students where we want to see what's going on with their bodies, with their voices. And do you listen to them critically and observe them first, and then make an assessment as to which chakra needs to be cleansed or cleared or addressed? I'm not sure what the right terminology is. Or do you kind of tap into the chakras and then go, they're stuck in that part of their voice.
Can I start, Kristin, and then you jump in? Yeah. So the very first thing we do when someone walks in the room is we sit them down and they breathe. We don't have them sing right away. We do what we have this practice called meeting the mood. And so we observe how they're breathing. We have specific breathing practices we ask them to do. Simple, very simple. Breathe in for 5, breathe out for 5.
That's
breathe
simple.
in, breathe out.
Simple. We can all do that.
Right, we can all do that. But in that, if you're trained to know what to look for, and this comes from our yoga therapy background too, you begin to recognize patterns in breathing. And patterns in breathing will tell you a lot about where the student is in the moment. So, typically we have people walk in the door from their lives, and we don't know what they're bringing in with them, and we don't know where they're going, and they're so they're already at a certain place. So you begin by meeting the mood. If somebody is down, you meet it there and then elevate it through breathing. If someone is very upregulated, you meet it there and then bring it down towards center. So you find where they are, and then we have a program which we call not a program but a practice which we call elemental toning, and that helps us also connect and assess where things are. But it's also a tool for beginning to work with the elements. So, Kristin, why don't you tell them about elemental toning?
Well, I wanted to say first that you said, do you listen this way or do you listen that way? We definitely do not listen critically, because that would be listening for faults or what we would think is a fault.
Which is what we do, though, is like the average voice teacher, that's what we're doing. It's like the mechanic that's looking under the bonnet of the car. We've been trained to look for faults.
And when I said critically, I don't mean fault finding. I mean listening with an objective ear. Yeah,
I didn't hear you say critically.
I said critically.
Yeah. And so, and I know what you meant, like diagnostic. And
that
this
was me.
Because especially in graduate schools, right, you're taught to diagnose and to think critically about what you hear. But a person is not clinical, and they have so many different facets to a human being, right? If you're actually talking about meeting a person holistically and offering them tools holistically, then you can't really be critical. So I would say we listen with generous compassion, and we're observing. And then we are holding out information, and what that individual chooses to do with that is their own prerogative. And when Mark is talking about elemental toning, what we're doing is we're taking the element of a chakra, and a chakra, I think it's important to define what chakras are, because people might not know what those are. So chakra is Sanskrit for wheel. And so if anyone's ever seen an image or a silhouette of the human body with like these rainbow glowy orbs up it, right, those would be chakras. But chakras in our sense are a conceptual model for organizing sensations in the body. And if you were to look on an MRI or an X-ray, you would never find a chakra. But if you look at chakras in terms of philosophically, where they're located, what's associated with them, there are nerve plexuses actually at each of those points. And so there is some research now into what those ancient philosophers were really tapping into, which were nerve plexuses that are associated with each of those points of the body. But so with elemental toning.
Can you name the 7 chakras in case people don't know what they are, where those points are?
Yes. So you have your root chakra, and these all have Sanskrit names too, but I'm not going to do that right now. So, okay. So there's root chakra, and that's the area from the perineum or the base of the pelvic floor down to the soles of the feet. And then you have the second chakra, that is the sacral chakra. That's the area of below the navel in the pelvis, the pelvic bowl, if you will. And then you have third chakra, and that is, I keep wanting to call it what we call it, which is our identity center.
Solar plexus.
Yes,
I
your
even
solar-
solar
yes,
plexus.
yes, correct. So your solar plexus, and that's the epigastrum area. And then you have your heart chakra, which is heart center on the body in the middle of the chest. And then you have your throat chakra, which is here. And they have fronts and backs. It's not just like it sits on the front of your body. It's because it's internally, like along the spine. And then you have sixth chakra, which is, people sometimes call it the third eye, like here. And then you have your crown chakra, which is at the crown of your head.
Yeah, and each of these represent something. Like they all have a different energy force, a different emotion, a different.
They have different attributes assigned to them.
Yes. Okay.
Right. Yes. And so, for example, when Mark was talking about elemental toning as a way to start to interface with these energies that are already in your body, and this is just turning your awareness towards them so that you can then leverage your awareness of that to however you see fit. So let's use first chakra, for example. So first chakra, your root chakra, the element is earth. And then the elemental tone that we use in YogaVoice is a grunt. So what we're doing is we're taking sounds that human beings make because they're human beings. Mm-hmm. So a grunt, a howl, laughter. And we figured out from our perspective, which of these like innate sounds that you make as a human being would correspond to which element we're talking about. Right. So for earth, we use a grunt because a grunt is a very like primal sound. It has a very clear initiation and ending of sound, which you could liken to an onset, which is what we associate with first chakra. And so when we talk about invoking the energies of that part of your body, we're talking about using this grunt and using it to cultivate the stability, the presence that is already housed in your sound, and making sure you're aware of it and that you can find it. Mark, do you have anything you want to add to that?
No, I think that's right. So each of these chakras are associated with different body-mind elements.
Yes.
So, and you're right, there's a psychological side to it, there's a physical side to it. But again, we say we tune into them as where we sense sensation in our body, where are the sensation patterns in our body. Mm-hmm. And then the YogaVoice piece is that we associate the vocal element with the chakra element. So earth becomes an onset, water becomes the flow of breath that creates registration. The fire in the third chakra becomes agility. In singing, the air in fourth chakra becomes sostenuto and dynamic contrast. The space in fifth chakra becomes resonance, balancing, and articulation freedom. All of the elements are combined in the brain, so that's the focus center. That's the ability to concentrate and have a single pointed focus and not be distracted by all the different things you're trying to do. Yeah. And then the seventh chakra is your inspiration center. So that's where we find inspiration in music making. So all of those things are in Miller, but we've brought them into your body. And I do want to say one other thing about Miller too, is that we think about him as a mechanist. And he always made the distinction between mechanists and holists in terms of pedagogues and teaching. But in my experience with him, he was sort of a both and. He was heavily mechanistic because he believed that anatomically specific language reduced the possibility of misinterpretation. And that if you say to somebody, We need more space in the pharynx. That can be interpreted different ways. And I've had the experience where
Exactly.
people depress their tongue to create space, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is another imbalance. But if you say to them, the soft palate is here, and you want to raise the soft palate needs to be raised, and the laryngeal posture lowers when the soft palate raises, that's specific language. So that's what he called mechanism. But he always drew it back to the song and to what you're trying to do in the music and how to express the music, and that the artistry is the technician is the servant of the artist and not the other way around.
Wow. I would not have known that of Miller.
Yeah, well, no one does, because all they do is read the books.
Yes.
But that was really what he was trying to accomplish.
It's a shame, because it's almost like he's being misunderstood.
Aren't we all?